I remember a woman, she was probably my age, she probably was 60 years old, and she was running and screaming and crying and saying, "Please take somebody else. I don't want to die. I don't want to die."
The Holocaust devastated 6 million Jewish women who faced horrors beyond imagination, silent deaths in gas chambers, slow torment through starvation, and brutal violence that shattered bodies and souls. These are not just stories of suffering, they are shocking realities that will leave you unable to forget what happened. Medical experimentation and the assault on motherhood. The Nazi regime's methodical assault on Jewish women began with what they considered the fundamental threat to their racial ideology, the ability of Jewish women to bear children. This was not merely a byproduct of their genocidal campaign, but a deliberately planned and scientifically orchestrated attack on the very essence of Jewish womanhood and the continuity of Jewish life. In the sterile corridors of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Block 10 became synonymous with horror beyond imagination. Here, under the supervision of SS doctors like Karl Klauberg and Horst Schumann, Jewish women became unwilling subjects in experiments designed to perfect methods of mass sterilization. At Auschwitz, SS doctors like Karl Klauberg conducted sterilization experiments on Jewish women, injecting chemicals into their reproductive organs to render them infertile. These procedures, conducted without the most basic medical ethics, anesthesia, or informed consent, represented a calculated effort to eliminate the Jewish people, not just through immediate murder, but through the prevention of future generations. Dr. Karl Klauberg, a gynecologist who had built a reputation in pre-war Germany for treating infertility, perverted his medical knowledge in service of genocide. Working under direct authorization from Heinrich Himmler, he established what he euphemistically called his experimental station at Auschwitz-Birkenau. His stated goal was ambitious in its cruelty: to develop methods for mass sterilization that could be implemented efficiently across all Nazi-occupied territories, allowing for the systematic elimination of what the Nazis considered undesirable populations without the logistical challenges of mass murder. Jewish women in camps like Auschwitz were subjected to experimental injections of caustic substances, e.g. formalin mixed with Novocaine, into their fallopian tubes by doctors like Karl Klauberg, causing severe pain, infections, and permanent infertility. The chemical cocktails injected into these women's reproductive organs were designed to cause scarring and blockage of the fallopian tubes, rendering them permanently sterile. The process was excruciating, with many women describing pain so severe they lost consciousness during the procedures. Survivors who endured these experiments later testified that the physical agony was matched only by the psychological devastation of understanding what was being done to them. The deliberate targeting of their reproductive capacity was understood not merely as medical torture, but as an attack on their fundamental identity as women and their connection to the future of their people. Many women emerged from these procedures unable to walk for weeks, suffering from high fevers, severe internal bleeding, and infections that, in many cases, proved fatal. Beyond the chemical injection experiments, high doses of radiation were applied to women's ovaries, causing burns, peritonitis, and organ removal for study. Dr. Horst Schumann's radiation experiments represented another horrifying avenue of sterilization research. Women were positioned between powerful X-ray machines and subjected to focused radiation on their reproductive organs. The radiation doses used were far beyond any therapeutic level, designed specifically to destroy ovarian function. The radiation experiments were conducted with the same cold clinical detachment that characterized all Nazi medical crimes. Women were brought into the X-ray room, often under the pretense of routine medical examinations, and positioned for what they were told would be brief diagnostic procedures. Instead, they were subjected to radiation exposure that caused immediate severe burns to their abdominal areas and internal organs. Many women developed peritonitis, a life-threatening inflammation of the abdominal cavity, while others suffered from radiation sickness that caused nausea, vomiting, and extreme weakness. The cruelty extended far beyond the experimental subjects to encompass all pregnant women who arrived at the camps. Nazi policy regarding pregnant Jewish women was unambiguous and merciless. Pregnancy among Jewish women was not merely forbidden, it was punishable by immediate death. Pregnant Jewish women faced extreme cruelty. SS guards and doctors beat pregnant women with clubs, whips, or dogs, often targeting their stomachs. This policy was implemented with such systematic brutality that it became one of the most traumatic aspects of camp life life for all women, pregnant or not, who witnessed these atrocities. Dr. Gisela Perl, a Jewish physician who survived Auschwitz, later wrote extensively about the impossible moral choices she faced in trying to protect pregnant women under her care. Forced abortions without anesthesia were performed on pregnant Jewish women in ghettos and camps in unsanitary conditions to avoid execution. Doctors like Gisela Perl performed these secretly to save mothers' lives, as pregnancy meant immediate death under Nazi policies. Dr. Perl's memoir, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz, reveals the heartbreaking reality of a physician forced to choose between allowing pregnant women to be murdered by the Nazis or performing abortions under the most primitive conditions to save the mothers' lives. Working in secret, often using her bare hands, she performed these procedures, knowing that she was destroying potential life to preserve existing life. The psychological burden of these decisions haunted her for the rest of her life, yet she understood that in the context of Auschwitz, these actions represented the only form of mercy available. Apart from using humans as subjects in horrific experiments, another punishment method was public humiliation and the systematic destruction of human dignity. The Nazi methodology for destroying Jewish women extended far beyond physical violence to encompass a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare designed to strip away every vestige of human dignity and individual identity. This process began the moment women arrived at concentration camps and continued relentlessly throughout their imprisonment, representing one of the most insidious aspects of the Holocaust's assault on human worth. The dehumanization process commenced immediately upon arrival at the camps, with what survivors universally describe as one of the most traumatic experiences of their entire imprisonment. Upon arrival at camps like Auschwitz, men shaved women's heads, pubic and body hair, often roughly, causing profound humiliation, especially for those from modest Jewish traditions. This forced shearing was conducted with deliberate brutality, using dull razors and rough techniques that often left cuts and abrasions across the scalp and body. For Jewish women, particularly those from Orthodox communities where hair held deep religious and cultural significance, this assault represented a violation that transcended the merely physical. In traditional Jewish practice, married women cover their hair as an expression of modesty and spiritual devotion. The forced removal of their hair in front of male guards and prisoners represented not just a practical dehumanizing measure, but a deliberate attack on their religious identity and personal dignity. The testimony of Lisa Slater provides a harrowing first-hand account of systematic sexual violence in occupied Berlin. She described how Russian soldiers received explicit permission for these acts.
And then they came downstairs to the basement, putting this cardboard on the table, telling the people in Berlin, Väterchen Stalin gave his troops the right to rape, to steal, to kill, to do whatever they want to do.
Lisa's testimony continues with horrific details about the systematic nature of these assaults. The violence was conducted with deliberate cruelty and public humiliation.
They put her against the wall, and they stood in line with their machine gun pointing at us and raped the woman. And they were not 18 years or 19 or nobody looked good. I mean, you didn't want to look good.
Lisa witnessed the murder of those who tried to protect their loved ones.
And one night her husband was just so frustrated, he got up and thrust forward and kept saying, no, no, please, no. And what they did, they turned around, shot him, raped her, and after they finished raping her, shot her.
Following the head shaving, women were subjected to even more invasive and humiliating procedures. Women were stripped naked in public for selections, forced to stand for hours, run, or exercise, while SS officers made lewd comments. This occurred daily in camps like Auschwitz, eroding their dignity and exposing them to further abuse. The selection process became a daily ritual of terror and degradation that served multiple purposes within the Nazi system of control. Survivor Rachel Levy's testimony provides crucial insight into how these selections were conducted and their devastating psychological impact.
Dr. Joseph Mengele did his sudden exams. He would examine people, and he'd swing the doors open, and there he was, and you had to stand in line, and he looked you up and down naked. He looked at the blemishes, and if you looked weak, and he picked out the people that he thought of no use in the camp anymore.
These selections served multiple functions within the Nazi system of terror. On the surface, they were presented as practical assessments of prisoners' ability to work and contribute to the war effort. In reality, they were psychological torture designed to maintain absolute control through unpredictable terror. Women never knew from day to day whether they would survive the next selection, creating a state of constant anxiety and helplessness that made organized resistance extremely difficult. The forced nudity during selections was particularly devastating for women from modest religious backgrounds. Many Jewish women had never been naked in front of men other than their husbands, if they were married. The forced exposure before male guards, doctors, and fellow prisoners represented a profound violation of their moral and religious principles. The guards and officers conducting these selections often made deliberately crude and humiliating comments about women's bodies, treating them as objects rather than human beings. If that's not enough, let's tell you about another terrifying punishment Jewish women endured. Gas chamber death experiment. In the face of systematic dehumanization and almost certain death, acts of resistance took many forms, from small daily defiances to extraordinary escape attempts that defied all odds. Rachel Levy's story represents one of the most remarkable documented escapes from the gas chambers of Auschwitz, demonstrating how quick thinking, courage, and an unbreakable will to live could triumph even in humanity's darkest hour. Rachel's testimony reveals the psychological complexity of survival in extreme circumstances, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death, and where ordinary human bonds of friendship could provide the catalyst for extraordinary acts of courage. Her story begins during one of the routine selections that terrorized daily life at Auschwitz, when she and her friend found themselves chosen for immediate death.
Well, we were standing in the queue near the kitchens, and for some reason or other we were looking at the gate, of course, the famous gate where once you got through there, you didn't come back. And there's some kind of commotion started. And my friend was very brave. Suddenly she got hold of my hand. She said, "Come, let's go." I said, "Where are we going?" "We're getting out of here."
The moment Rachel describes captures the essence of resistance in the camps, the refusal to accept death passively, even when escape seemed impossible. Her friend's sudden decision to flee the death queue required not only personal courage, but also the willingness to risk both their lives on an improvised plan with little chance of success. The fact that they were standing near the camp kitchens would prove crucial to their survival, providing them with the opportunity they needed to blend into the daily routine of camp life. The brilliance of their escape lay in its simplicity and the perfect timing of their decision. The daily distribution of soup to camp prisoners was such a routine part of Auschwitz life that guards paid little attention to the kitchen workers and their assistants. By grabbing hold of a soup container and joining the distribution process, Rachel and her friend made themselves invisible in plain sight. They transformed themselves from condemned prisoners into essential workers, at least long enough to escape the immediate threat of death. The disbelief that greeted their return speaks to how extraordinary their escape was, even within the context of a place where daily survival required constant improvisation and courage. Fellow prisoners, who had witnessed countless selections and knew the inexorable nature of the Nazi death machinery, could hardly believe that anyone could escape once they had been chosen for the gas chambers. The fact that Rachel and her friend could barely believe it themselves underscores the almost miraculous nature of their survival. The Nazis didn't stop here. They pushed further, doing everything possible to break Jewish women physically and stripping away every trace of dignity. The systematic implementation of terror through physical violence. The physical violence inflicted upon Jewish women in Nazi concentration camps was neither random nor uncontrolled, but rather represented a carefully orchestrated system of terror designed to maintain absolute control while maximizing psychological damage to the prisoner population. This violence was implemented through a hierarchy of perpetrators, from SS guards to prisoner functionaries, creating a complex web of brutality that served multiple purposes within the Nazi genocidal machinery. Female SS guards, or Aufseherinnen, such as Irma Grese and Dorothea Binz, were notorious for their brutality. They whipped, beat, and kicked Jewish women, often targeting those already weakened by starvation or illness. These women, who had volunteered for positions of authority within the concentration camp system, often displayed levels of cruelty that shocked even their male SS counterparts. Their willingness to inflict extreme violence on other women added a particularly disturbing dimension to the camp experience. Irma Grese, known as the Beast of Belsen, became one of the most infamous female guards in the Nazi system. system. At Auschwitz and later at Bergen-Belsen, she was known for her particular cruelty toward Jewish women prisoners. Survivors described her as taking apparent pleasure in inflicting pain, often using a plaited whip made from cellophane to beat prisoners for the slightest infractions or sometimes for no reason at all. Her youth, she was only in her early 20s, made her brutality even more shocking to the women she tormented. Dorothea Binz, chief wardress at Ravensbrück, represented another example of how the Nazi system corrupted individuals and turned them into instruments of terror. At Ravensbrück, guards like Binz were known to beat women until they collapsed or died, sometimes for minor infractions like seeking extra food. Binz was particularly known for her use of trained dogs to terrorize prisoners and for personally participating in selections that sent thousands of women to their deaths. The violence was not merely punitive, but served as a tool of psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of all prisoners, not just those directly victimized. When women witnessed their fellow prisoners being beaten to death for minor infractions, it created an atmosphere of constant terror that made any form of resistance seem futile and dangerous. The unpredictability of when violence might erupt was as important as the violence itself in maintaining control. Punishment methods included various forms of torture that had been refined through experience to maximize suffering while keeping victims alive long enough to serve as examples to other prisoners. Jewish women faced arbitrary and brutal punishments like the post, a form of hanging torture where victims were suspended by their wrists, causing excruciating pain. This punishment, known in German as Aufhängen, involved tying a prisoner's hands behind their back and suspending them from a post, causing the arms to be pulled from their sockets and resulting in excruciating pain that could last for hours. The post punishment was often used for infractions as minor as being caught with an extra piece of bread or failing to stand at attention quickly enough during roll call. Women subjected to this torture often suffered permanent damage to their arms and shoulders, assuming they survived the experience at all. The public nature of these punishments ensured that all prisoners witnessed the consequences of any behavior deemed unacceptable by their captors. Public executions served a similar function in the Nazi system of control. Public executions, such as shootings at Auschwitz's Block 11 or gassings at Ravensbrück's portable gas chamber, were used to terrorize and eliminate women, particularly those deemed unfit for labor. These executions were often conducted in front of the entire prisoner population, forcing women to witness the murder of their fellow prisoners as a constant reminder of their own vulnerability. Block 11 at Auschwitz, known as the Death Block, became synonymous with torture and execution. Women who were selected for punishment were taken to the basement of this block, where they faced interrogation, torture, and often death. The sounds of suffering that emerged from Block 11 were audible throughout the camp, serving as a constant psychological reminder of the fate that awaited anyone who violated camp rules or was simply unlucky enough to be selected for punishment. The systematic nature of this violence was reflected in the detailed records kept by camp administrators. Punishment ledgers documented not only the infractions that led to punishment, but also the specific forms of violence employed and their effects on the victims. This bureaucratic approach to brutality reveals how the Nazi system institutionalized violence as a normal part of camp operations, training guards to view extreme cruelty as simply part of their daily duties. Let's tell you about another cruel practice the Nazis used, one designed to slowly kill Jewish women, making every day a battle between life and death. Starvation as a weapon. The Nazi implementation of systematic starvation in concentration camps represented one of the most calculated and insidious forms of torture ever devised, designed not merely to cause suffering, but to achieve the gradual murder of prisoners while extracting maximum labor value from their deteriorating bodies. For Jewish women, this starvation was implemented with particular cruelty, targeting not only their physical survival, but their psychological well-being and their fundamental identity as nurturers and caretakers. Starvation was a deliberate tool of punishment. Jewish women were given minimal food rations, leading to severe malnutrition and diseases like typhus. The daily caloric intake provided to prisoners was calculated with scientific precision to be just enough to maintain basic bodily functions for a limited period, while ensuring gradual physical deterioration and eventual death. This was not neglect or wartime scarcity, but deliberate policy implemented with the full knowledge of its lethal consequences.
We just vegetated in the block and talked to people if we could, and mostly we talked about food.
The daily rations typically consisted of a piece of black bread, often moldy and mixed with sawdust, a bowl of watery soup that might contain a few vegetables or scraps of meat, and occasionally a small piece of margarine or sausage. The total caloric value of these rations rarely exceeded 800–1,000 calories per day, while the heavy labor expected of prisoners required 3,000 to 4,000 calories for basic survival. This calculated deficit meant that prisoners were literally consuming their own bodies to survive, with muscle mass and fat reserves disappearing rapidly under the combined assault of inadequate nutrition and physical demands. The psychological impact of constant hunger was as devastating as the physical effects. Survivors consistently report that food became the primary focus of all thoughts and conversations, overriding all other concerns and relationships. At Ravensbrück, women pulled paving rollers like oxen or worked long shifts in poorly lit factories, with any perceived slacking met with beatings or death. The combination of brutal physical labor and inadequate nutrition created a vicious cycle where weakness led to decreased work capacity, which led to punishment, which further weakened already starving prisoners. Women were forced to perform back-breaking manual labor while their bodies consumed themselves for energy. At Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp designed specifically for women, prisoners were assigned to construction projects, factory work, and agricultural labor that would have been challenging for well-fed, healthy individuals. The sight of skeletal women pulling heavy rollers used for road construction, their bodies clearly wasted from starvation, represented one of the most horrific examples of how the Nazi system extracted every possible resource from their victims before allowing them to die. The search for additional food became a constant preoccupation that consumed enormous mental and physical energy. Seeking extra food was a punishable offense, often met with flogging or confinement. Women risked severe punishment to scavenge for potato peels, scraps of bread, or anything edible they might find around the camp. The cruel irony was that the very act of seeking the nutrition necessary for survival was treated as a crime punishable by torture or death. The communal aspects of eating, which in normal circumstances provide comfort and social connection, were transformed into sources of additional suffering in the camps. Women were forced to eat their meager rations in full view of others, creating constant temptation to steal food from fellow prisoners. The bonds of friendship and solidarity that might have provided psychological support were strained by the fundamental biological drive for survival, as hunger reduced human behavior to its most basic elements. The starvation also had devastating effects on pregnant women and nursing mothers. Women who arrived at camps while pregnant faced the horror of trying to nourish a growing fetus while their own bodies were being systematically starved. Those who somehow managed to give birth in the camps found themselves unable to produce milk for their infants, forcing them to watch their newborns slowly starve to death. This represented perhaps the cruelest aspect of the Nazi starvation policy, forcing mothers to witness the destruction of their children through their own inability to provide nourishment. The Nazis knew that emotional connections were a human's deepest vulnerability, so they twisted it into one of their most heart-wrenching forms of punishment: separation and loss. Perhaps no aspect of the Nazi persecution of Jewish women was more psychologically devastating than the systematic destruction of family bonds and the forced separation of mothers from their children. This was not merely a byproduct of the logistical challenges of genocide, but a deliberate strategy designed to maximize psychological suffering while eliminating the support systems that might have provided emotional strength for resistance or survival. The process of family destruction began the moment transport trains arrived at the death camps. The cattle cars that had carried families together for days under horrific conditions would suddenly open, and within minutes, families that had been together for generations would be torn apart forever. The speed and brutality of this separation was designed to prevent emotional farewells and to disorient newly arrived prisoners, making them more vulnerable and less likely to resist.
I saw my mother going pushed to the right and my brother, my older brother, to the left. And we watched her walk away with a baby in her arms and my two little sisters.
The immediate separation upon arrival at camps was designed to prevent families from supporting each other and to facilitate the murder process. Women often never saw their loved ones again after those first moments of separation.
That's all I knew then. And I didn't know what was happening actually. Then we were rushed through in a queue again into somewhere, which was the block in the camp.
One survivor's account reveals the casual cruelty with which guards informed prisoners about their family's fate.
At Auschwitz, I asked one of the Gestapos, I had the nerve to ask him, when I'm going to be together with my father and mother. He pointed to the crematorium where the smoke are coming from the chimneys. And he said, "You see the smoke coming from the chimney? That's horror."
The targeting of mothers and young children for immediate murder served the Nazi goal of preventing the reproduction of Jewish families while inflicting maximum psychological damage on those who survived the initial selection. Pregnant women and those with young children were labeled incapable of work and sent directly to gas chambers upon arrival at killing centers like Auschwitz, often as the first groups targeted, separating families and ensuring reproductive destruction. The experiences of Jewish women during the Holocaust reveal not just the depths of human cruelty, but also the incredible strength of the human spirit to endure, resist, and ultimately bear witness to truth. Their testimonies ensure that these histories are not forgotten and that future generations understand both the warning signs of genocidal persecution and the moral imperative to protect human dignity for all people. Which of these punishments do you think was the most horrific? Share your thoughts in the comments below and click on the cards on screen for more.